All right, continuing in chapter 20, looking at the diseases that, or the organisms that can cause encephalitis, so infection of the actual brain tissue. So this is divided into acute and subacute. So looking first at acute encephalitis, these are mainly all caused by viral infections. So we'll just be looking at viruses for this. So some of the signs and symptoms, because it's affecting the brain, looking kind of for behavior changes, confusion, decreased consciousness, could be seizures, and similar symptoms to what we see with meningitis. Again, since they're mainly viral infections, those that can be treated are typically treated with acyclovir, which is going to inhibit the production of viral DNA. So it inhibits a viral DNA polymerase. Looking at some of the main groups that cause the acute encephalitis, arboviruses, and this is a big collection kind of category of viruses, and they are transmitted by arthropod vectors, so between species to species, especially through the blood, so like mosquitoes, ticks, those type of organisms are mainly going to be the vectors. These are distributed worldwide, mainly in the tropics and subtropics, but definitely do hit in the United States, mainly because of those vectors, kind of a spike in late spring, early fall when those vectors are most active. And then what actually happens are the warm-blooded hosts. So for example, even like deer or birds can kind of harbor that infection. And then whenever it gets warm and again, the vectors start coming out, then they're transmitting those into people. As far as looking just at how many people are infected or the severeness, so millions are infected. There are definitely thousands that die, and with the arboviruses, unfortunately, no satisfactory treatment. So even the acyclovir, again, those viruses are so hard to treat because they use our cells. The other main category that we talk about here is herpes simplex virus, or HSV. So, of course, herpes is divided into type 1 and 2. We'll talk more about this when we go through the sexually transmitted diseases. But of course, cold sores and then the sexually transmitted version make up the two different types. Here, the reason we're talking about it is because it can cause encephalitis in newborns, so neonatal. And this is whenever the mom is HSV positive. So if the mom has herpes, she can pass that on to the child, and it can cause encephalitis in the newborn. So we say that it's a disseminated, again, it's passed down to the infant. It can occur, though, in some older children and young adults between 5 and 30, and even individuals over 50 who can be susceptible to this. Again, in those situations, mainly caused by the herpes simplex virus 1, and it's due to reactivation. So this virus, if you think about a cold sore, it comes out, but then it goes away, but can become reactivated with stress or sun or that type of thing. And that's because that virus is becoming dormant in the brain in what are called the trigeminal ganglion. So then it can become reactivated in these individuals. So just again, the table that kind of looks at these, again, the two main ones, the arboviruses, and there are a few different diseases that are, or types of viruses that are listed here. Probably the most common one would be the West Nile virus. The other ones definitely exist and impact the United States, but to a lesser degree. West Nile is the most common. And if we looked at that again, arthropod bites is the main form of transmission. Again, it's a virus, so it attaches, fuses with our cells, and then it can invade other cells very easily. Again, prevention would be controlling insects, so preventing mosquito bites, tick bites, that type of thing. again, no treatment. So understanding this one, kind of the distinctive, having, having a known history of insect, bites. And so if somebody had a tick on them, or of course, mosquito bites are very common, but just kind of keeping up with that helps with the diagnosis. And some of these can be used, or these arboviruses are categorized as a bioterrorism agent that could be used for those measures. Then just looking at the summary here of the herpes simplex virus 1 and 2, again, vertical transmission from mom to infant, or reactivation of a latent infection. And again, maternal screening is the best way to prevent this. So again, knowing whether the mom is positive for herpes during delivery. And again, this one can be treated with the acyclovir, and mainly only found in infants due to that vertical transmission as a disseminated disease, but can be seen in other children or older individuals. And again, the HSV1 is the most common type that is causing the encephalitis. There are a couple others that cause acute encephalitis. So the JC virus, and this is really only going to be found in individuals who are immunocompromised due to AIDS. So typically this is something that could be fought by the body, and no infection or no disease would actually occur. But in individuals with AIDS who are immunocompromised, this virus can cause encephalitis. So about 5% of adults with AIDS will be exposed and have encephalitis due to this virus. And there's also what's referred to as post-infection encephalitis. So again, this would be a secondary infection. So they were infected by something that caused a disease, but then due to that infection, it leads to encephalitis, or infection of the brain. And that includes measles, some other viral infections, and even occasionally vaccination. So again, none of those by themselves would cause encephalitis, but after they're infected with measles or some other viral infection, it can lead to an infection in the brain. So, keeping up with those histories is important. Treatment, this is, again, the issue here is that it's causing inflammation in the brain due to these other diseases, or these other infections. So decreasing the inflammation is the treatment. And again, keeping up with history so that could be detected or diagnosed. All right, then going into our subacute encephalitis. So here, acute just means it's short-lived. Subacute, a little bit longer, takes longer to show up, less striking kind of symptoms. The three main that are involved here: toxoplasma, measles, and then those prions. So looking at the Toxoplasma gondii, again, definitely distributed throughout the world, not really isolated to any region. Estimated the majority of individuals have come in contact, so it's likely that many of us have been exposed to this, but were able to fight it off with no signs or symptoms, or it was something that was kind of brushed off, like a sore throat or a fever, something like that just we didn't think anything about. However, where this becomes, where we pay particular attention to it, is that infection in the fetus, or those who are immunocompromised or immunodeficient, infections in these groups can be severe and often fatal. So people with a history of this are more likely, actually kind of a unique characteristic, people who have been exposed to this organism are actually known to display more thrill-seeking behavior. So it's, the link between that isn't completely understood, but it's an interesting kind of footnote that if you're a thrill seeker, it could actually be due to being previously exposed to this organism. Just a little bit more about this one. It is a parasite, so it's flagellated, so it has those flagella. Its the primary reservoir is actually in cats. So this is why it's important for pregnant women not to change the litter box, because it would be in the feces. So just having a cat and touching a cat wouldn't necessarily pass that on, but it can be transmitted in the feces of cats. So not changing the litter box or being exposed to that is important while pregnant to prevent exposure, again, to the fetus. It's typically again asymptomatic. Again, many individuals have probably been exposed and never knew it. Just again, sore throat, lymph nodes, low-grade fever. Probably think you have a cold or something like that. However, there can be chronic or subacute encephalitis. Again, those who are immunosuppressed, so individuals with HIV. Again, infants, elderly who are less able to fight it off. All right, get about a 33% chance of the mom transmitting this to the fetus if exposed to it. So these congenital infections in the first trimester can lead to a stillbirth, can cause spleen and liver damage, liver failure, hydroencephalus, which is where they have extra water on the brain, seizures, and then even blindness in the eye. So again, staying away. This is kind of showing that life cycle here. So because it is kind of a reservoir in the cats aren't sick, but again, in their feces, they can pass on this parasite. And so again, pregnant women really should not, and same thing in animals, so like in cattle or in other livestock, again, if they're exposed, they can pass that on to their infants who would have a much more severe reaction. Then our looking at the measles virus. Again, this is a slow virus infection, so subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. This is due to a measles infection. So this is actually years after the measles episode. So they had measles, they kind of got over it, but then years later, we get this encephalitis that occurs, and that's due to direct invasion of the virus into the neural tissue. But it's unclear what can kind of lead to that persistence that some people may have that causes this later on. And then our other one, the prions, these are really a unique infectious agent. Again, prions are just proteins, so they don't have DNA, they're not a cell, they're not living by themselves, so there's no genetic material. So it's an infectious protein. And these cause what is referred to as transmissible, so it can be passed on, it's contagious, spongiform, because it causes the brain to become spongy. We'll see some pictures here in a second. Encephalopathies, so it's an infection of the brain or the CNS that can be passed on to individuals, and it causes the brain to become spongy. And it's all due to this protein that we'll talk more about here in a second. But some of the diseases, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, Kuru, again, there are some others in humans, but there are also, this can be found like scrapie or mad cow disease is what it is in different animals. So it's kind of, the disease name is based on the host or the organism infected. And just a little bit more about these prions. Again, there's a normal protein in our brain, so everybody has these proteins. So it's referred to as PRPC. So again, this is kind of the normal form of it. However, it then is originally changed into this prion protein, so PRPSC. It's for scrapie is actually where that originally kind of came from, because that was in sheep. But anyways, this changed protein kind of spontaneously converts other normal proteins. So again, that's what we mean by infectious. So once you have the PRPSC, it can kind of attack and convert the other normal proteins into this changed version, who then recruit other people. So again, it progresses as mutated proteins attack and change normal proteins. So the accumulation of that changed version causes plaques to form on the brain, but also holes. So that's the spongiform that comes. there. So this can also cause a disease when it's transferred to a new host. So again, the contaminated instruments. So especially when working with nervous tissue is where this is found. Again, we don't find prions don't infect any other part of the body, only the brain, but it can be transmitted by being exposed to neural tissue of a diseased organism. Even the infected meat, again, the meat itself doesn't have it, but if the meat was exposed to the neural tissue during processing, then it could contain some of the prions as well. All right, this is just a picture showing, kind of the normal brain, nice tight packing of our cells. However, in individuals with prion, we get these kind of holes in the brain that makes the brain look like a sponge. So again, this is definitely a fatal disease. Once infected, there's no treatment because it's an infectious protein. So again, staying away and prevention of neural tissue is the best way to prevent this. So looking at our table here, so again, the Toxoplasma gondii, again, mainly paying attention to that fecal oral route, especially between felines and those that have it. As far here, prevention, again, that personal hygiene, also food hygiene, it can be transmitted that way as well. There are a few treatments, but again, this subacute kind of slower progression of the disease, but mainly something we see in the fetus and immunocompromised. All right, then the subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. This is the one that is caused by the persistent measles, even years after somebody had measles, that this virus is able to then attack the brain and lead to encephalitis. No treatment, really no way to prevent it. So distinctive features, just knowing about a history of measles, that this could be an issue later on. And then the prions, those infectious proteins. So again, avoiding infected meat or instruments that would have neural tissue on them. Again, there's not like a vaccine or anything like that. There's no treatment for it. It does have a long incubation, so you could be exposed, and it takes a long time before those PRPSCs are able to recruit enough or change enough normal proteins into the changed version before symptoms actually start to occur. All right, and then just some other things to think about, some other diseases that we'll talk about later as we get into other systems that can cause subacute encephalitis. So Rocky Mountain spotted fever can lead to encephalitis, Lyme's disease, Bartonella, tapeworm. There's one of the tapeworms, the parasites that can cause it, as well as syphilis. So again, we'll talk more about these, kind of bring them back up as we move through these other chapters. But again, this will be where they're infected by one organism, but it can lead to encephalitis based on these infections.